Is everybody okay back there? I mean, what happened?
We'll talk about that when we get to the station.
This man, accused of killing hockey star Johnny Gaudreau and his brother, is now pointing the finger at the victims. His defense now argues both brothers were more intoxicated than he was during this alleged drunk driving crash last summer.
How much have you had to drink today?
I mean, I've been drinking beers, but I haven't had one in like 2 hours.
Okay.
So since the accident, like probably an hour or so.
Okay.
Before we get into the newest details, let's backtrack just a bit to explain how we got here. If you're an NHL hockey fan, odds are you've already heard the name Johnny Gaudreau. He played in the NHL for more than a decade, skating for both the Calgary Flames and the Columbus Blue Jackets. He has a long list of some pretty impressive accolades that he gained during this time, and he even had the nickname Johnny Hockey during all of this. Now, he was born in Salem, New Jersey, and died just a few miles away in Oldmans Township. That was last summer when Johnny and his brother Matthew Gaudreau were out riding bikes along a rural highway. This piece of the story is extra heartbreaking, but just needs to be said. Both Johnny and Matthew were expecting newborn babies as both of their wives were pregnant. On top of that, they were in town for their sister's wedding, where they were supposed to be groomsmen the following day, but that never happened. It was about 8 p.m. on August 29th of last year when both Johnny and Matthew were hit by a dark-colored SUV.
911, where is your emergency?
Hello, I'm not really sure exactly where I'm at, but I just witnessed a hit and run of two people on bikes.
Is anybody hurt?
Literally, yes.
That call was made not long after the men were hit when a witness reported the crash. As you can hear in the recording, the caller tells the 911 dispatch they witnessed a hit and run.
Any color, license plate?
It was black. I couldn't see the license plate. They literally just drove away.
And do you know which direction of travel they went?
They were going. Do you know which way of travel that they went? What?
Prosecutors say the man behind that hit and run is 44-year-old Sean Higgins. They believe Higgins was driving along the same highway where the brothers were riding their bikes. He was apparently trying to pass other cars on this one-lane highway and allegedly crashed into the brothers instead. After the crash, prosecutors say he drove off and even started throwing evidence out the window as he drove. But officers were able to catch up with him about a half a mile down the road.
All right, where were you coming from, sir?
Taco Bell, Bensville.
Here's your ID. Where were you before Taco Bell?
My house.
Almost right away, officers ask whether Higgins has been drinking.
Okay, how much have you had to drink today?
I mean, I've been drinking beers, but I haven't had one in like 2 hours.
Okay.
So since the accident, like probably an hour or so.
Okay.
So Higgins says he hasn't had a drink in a while, but still agrees to take a sobriety test.
You may begin.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Ow. Keep going.
Like I explained, 9 steps forward, series of small
Oh.
steps, 9 back.
Ow. Sorry.
In a couple of instances, Higgins appears to lose his balance or struggle remembering directions.
You may begin.
2001, 2002, 2003, 2004, 2005, 2006. Good. I'm sorry, I'm just freaked out. Like, what am I supposed to be doing again? I'm
Counting it
sorry.
out loud until I tell you to stop.
Okay, 1001, 1002, 1003, 2004, 2005, 2006, 2007, 2008, 2009, 2000, 10,000, 11,000. It's getting hard.
As Higgins is going through these sobriety tests, emergency responders are back at the crash scene. They arrived very quickly after that 911 call, but it was still too late. Both men were pronounced dead on the scene. About 10 minutes after officers first caught up with Higgins, he finally asks about Johnny and Matthew.
Is everybody okay back there? I mean, what happened?
We'll talk about that when we get to the station.
As you can see from that part of the recording, Higgins was eventually arrested and taken into custody.
All right, turn around and place your hands behind your back. I'm going to take this watch off, okay?
Yep.
A grand jury later indicted Higgins on 2 counts of reckless vehicular homicide, 2 counts of aggravated manslaughter, tampering with physical evidence, and leaving the scene of a fatal accident. Just last month, he entered a plea in the case.
Feinberger and Portella, have you had an opportunity to read and review the indictment with your client?
We have, Judge. We're going to enter a not guilty plea on his behalf. Waive a reading of the indictment, Judge.
Higgins was back in court again just this week, and there were even more updates.
The matter of State of New Jersey versus Sean Higgins under indictment 2412-405.
There are several things covered in this hearing, but let's start with a grand jury. Higgins' defense says it doesn't have all the exhibits that were used and needs them to build the case.
Throughout the grand jury transcript, the state makes references to photographs and exhibits. They're not attached to the grand jury notes. So I would need those first before I prepare. So I need, if, for example, if they say exhibit 1, I would need the photo or the diagram marked as exhibit 1 that was utilized at the grand jury. If it was in color, I would need a color photo of that as well.
There was a bit of talk about other discovery too.
The one regarding the blood, Your Honor, I don't think we need an actual motion. I do believe the blood request is proper.
Chain of custody?
It was more than that. It was chain of custody, refrigeration records, everything. If there's something the state objects to that, they can let us know. But everything that I asked for is standard in any other blood case I've had in New Jersey.
So in essence, it's not a motion, it's a discovery request.
Right, but we requested discovery initially. Certain things were missing, which is why I filed like this to preserve any issues that may occur.
Understood. I know you're seeking some discovery regarding other related type of plea offers.
Correct, Your Honor.
So are you prepared to proceed on that?
I'm prepared.
Briefing?
Yeah.
How long will you need to file a brief?
3 weeks.
Let's take a look at the calendar. 3 weeks takes us to the 25th, I believe. So what we'll do is defense brief, we do 225. And that is the brief regarding prior plea offers by the state. And Mr. Mestern, how long will you need to respond to that?
I'll need 3 weeks as well.
Absolutely. So that takes us then to 318 for the response.
If you noticed in the end of that soundbite, the second half, the judge actually gives the defense a deadline to respond to plea agreements that had been offered by the state. That was back on January 7th when they came forward with a plea deal of serving 2 consecutive 15-year prison sentences if Higgins were to plead guilty on the manslaughter charge. For leaving the scene, Higgins would also have to plead guilty and face an additional 5-year sentence. All that totals 35 years in prison. The defense says the plea carries such a large prison sentence because of the case's publicity. But there's even more from the defense too. In a filing this Tuesday, Higgins' team announced plans to file a motion to dismiss the indictment because of this grand jury evidence. They say the grand jury wasn't presented with specific evidence or information that would apparently prove Higgins is innocent. There was another statement made in these new court motions too, and this one is actually a bit more shocking. According to NJ.com, Higgins' defense claims the victims had a higher blood alcohol content than the driver. Tests revealed that Higgins blew a .087, and according to court docs filed by his defense, Johnny's BAC was .0129 and Matthew's was .134. The defense commented on all of this too, telling NJ.com that this new blood alcohol content info is essential to Higgins' case. They said in a statement, quote, "We believe these filings are essential to ensuring that our client's constitutional rights are protected and that he is not being treated unfairly based upon the amount of publicity being garnered." During this week's hearing, this wasn't directly brought up, but the defense did mention expert witnesses, and it seems like they plan to use at least one.
Does the state have any expert? Do you have any expert reports or any expert?
The state police reports that was discovered, sent out and discovered.
That's it?
Is what the state has, right?
Okay. And is there a blood draw expert?
The chemist that did the blood draw analysis is who we would call.
Okay. Once we go through everything.
And then if defense has an expert, obviously we'll take a look at that. And if we need to refute their expert, then we would get an expert.
Sure.
Okay.
Reasonable.
Yes.
Now, the defense says they're going to look into an expert witness, and we're going to do the same thing. We're actually going to bring in forensic chemist Bethany Pridgeon. And Bethany, you have testified in more than one trial. So right from the top, I want to ask you, what goes into being an expert witness?
Well, you've got to have the education and experience and training, in that particular field that you're going to testify in. Some standards are different from one state to the other. So in some states, you just need to know more than the average person would know in order to be qualified as an expert. But I think as a whole, scientific experts, we all expect each other to at least have some level of college or higher education, training, and experience in the field.
That makes sense. And this case specifically, I think, is probably going to involve a medical expert in relation to blood alcohol content because we have an alleged drunk driver. So let's say you're given this case. What are your next steps? I mean, the tests were administered probably months ago at the point that you received the information. Do you just go through that, or what would that look like?
Well, there's kind of a variety of things, especially with this case, because what's being compared is what we would consider ante-mortem blood alcohol content and then post-mortem. Or at least I haven't seen the results, but that's what I would anticipate, since two of the victims, unfortunately didn't make it. In ante-mortem, you're looking at the driver, so the person who is living. And the blood alcohol content testing is very straightforward in that situation. The results that come out of the lab are, typically the results that where the blood alcohol content was at or near the time of driving, depending on how much time had passed. Postmortem blood alcohol content is much more complex. So there's a lot more factors involved. So if you get one single result from a medical examiner's office, that may not actually mean what the actual blood alcohol level is. So there's a variety of other factors that need to be considered.
A lot going on here because we have testing for both the victims in this case and the driver. I want to go back to the victims, but let's start with the driver because it's pretty straightforward. He's accused of drinking and driving and causing this crash. So to me, it makes perfect sense that he would have to have his blood alcohol content tested. It turned out it was higher than the legal limit of 0.08, but he's pleaded not guilty to the charges. And I'm interested in that. How would he fight it if we have this paperwork in front of us, the medical examiner or whoever says it was over 0.08? I mean, how would you even fight that?
Yeah, so I mean, I work cases on both sides of the courtroom, and there are different defenses. They're going to look at from the defense angle, was the testing done properly? How much time had passed from the time of the accident to the time that the blood was drawn? What was the drinking history prior to the incident? Just to determine could the level have been higher or lower prior to the blood draw time. So something that's very important in these cases is that the blood alcohol level that we see is never going to be the actual blood alcohol level at the time of the incident, because there's no way to collect the blood immediately. And so there's some, evaluations that have to come into play. And that's, especially when we're at this 0.08 or near the 0.08, those are more defensible cases than some that are when the levels are much higher.
Okay, that makes sense to me, exactly what you're saying. And the 0.08, that always jumps out to me. I feel like that's in everyone's mind because in most states, that's the legal limit is 0.08. And it always gets me thinking, I mean, how much alcohol actually is 0.08? Is it one beer? Is it three? I know it depends on the person, how tall they are, their weight, and things like that. But could you maybe give me kind of a general idea of what over the legal limit could be?
Well, yeah, it definitely varies among individuals. So again, there's a lot of factors you have to take into play. You've got to look at height, weight, the gender of the individual, the fitness of the person. So it can vary, but one of the kind of things that quotes or comments that we often make are, if a male, an average size male, is drinking one standard alcoholic beverage an hour, most likely they're going to stay well below the legal limit. And while there may be some impairments involved, we wouldn't expect the impairment to be so high that they wouldn't be safe to drive. For the average woman, actually men is 1 to 2 drinks, I'm sorry. And for women, it's 1 drink per hour. So if you're at the 0.08 level, I mean, you are talking about the potential for multiple drinks. In a smaller man, that could be, you know, 3, 4 drinks, maybe 2 even, just depending on how small. For an average size man, I would expect that you'd see somewhere between 2 and 4 beverages in the system at the time to get up to that level.
It does sound that it's very dependent on the instance, rather, the time frame and the weight and the height, and there's a lot going on to it. We talked about the accused in this case, but I want to talk about the victims too, because now the defense is kind of pointing the finger at them, saying that these 2 men who unfortunately passed away in this incident, that they were more drunk than the driver. So right from the start, when these 2 people have passed away and we're going to go through and take a look at them, is it normal to test their blood alcohol content?
We do see that in a lot of postmortem cases. Typically there are two drivers, 2 different vehicles. Now I mean, bicycles are considered a type of vehicle, but obviously they're at a disadvantage against, a car or other larger vehicle. So you do see those things, their blood being tested in most accident cases where there's a lot of questions involved. And then of course, they look at the results, but then they also have to look out, the totality of the circumstances. Was there anything in the investigation that pointed to those parties doing anything that could have caused or prevented the accident? So that's why they typically will test the results, just to kind of get an idea where their drugs or alcohol on board. And just because something's in someone's system doesn't necessarily mean they're at fault. So that's why the overall investigation is so important. So even for the driver, you could also, there are incidents out there where, a driver is driving and someone goes out in front of them and then both people have something on board. So did impairment cause the accident? Did impairment of the victims or the driver, or was it not impairment at all? So the investigation combined with the results is very important. So if you see that the victims were just truly on the side of the road as reported, and they're just biking and they haven't gone into, outside of where they should be, then the investigation would not point to the fact that they have any alcohol on board as necessarily being a contributor to the accident.
I really like the way that you explained this, because when I was going through all of this and researching, just a disclaimer, I'm not a forensic chemist. So my first thought was, why do we even care what the blood alcohol content is of these 2 victims in the case? I mean, they unfortunately passed away. What does that have to do with anything? But the way that you broke it down, perhaps the defense could say maybe they swerved into the road or they were the ones who caused the accident. Do you think that's the route potentially that the defense would take if their blood alcohol content is really high?
I mean, yeah, I mean, that's a plausible defense that they could bring. Again, any time you bring evidence forward, there should be something to back it up. It's a plausible defense to say they may have been contributors to the incident, but then there's going to have to be some type of evidence brought forward that supports that, allegation.
When we're talking about the investigation moving forward, we're about 6 months out from this crash, and there is no trial date or anything set as of now. So I'm going to assume that the defense and prosecution are both going to continue to work, go through discovery, gather information. What would that look like for specifically the expert witness, let's say in the defense case, because they're the ones who've come forward and said, yeah, we're going to have an expert, and they're the ones who in their motions are mentioning all of this BAC stuff. So what would that specifically look like?
So in cases like this, that I've seen, the defense is going to ask for all of the information on, the testing results. I mean, they were going to make sure that all the testing was done properly for their client as well as for the victims. They're going to likely have someone investigating what was going on from both sides of the case in terms of prior to the incident. Again, they need the totality of the circumstances. When were people drinking? What were they drinking? How long were they drinking? All of that's going to be very important. Number one, to figure out, who may be at fault or if there was dual contribution. And then, the other thing, especially like I mentioned earlier with the post-mortem results, they're going to want to look at not just the blood that was collected in the result, but they're going to want to look at if there was any blood collected from the heart of the victims, from the fluid in the eye, because the ratios of the results in each of those fluids can kind of help point to a more accurate overall blood alcohol content. So they're going to want to look at all of those factors on both sides, to kind of point to, do we have actual results that we can rely upon in order to make these different arguments.
It seems like both sides have a lot of work ahead of them moving forward. Talking about what you were going through right there, it seems like they'll go through them with a fine-tooth comb. So we'll see what comes out with all of that. Either way, we can just say that this is a very heartbreaking case. But Bethany, thank you for coming on with us and breaking all of that down for us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Sean Higgins is due back in court on March 26th. Reporting for Law&Crime, I'm Gillespie.